Okay, everybody, we're going to start. We're actually very happy to kick off the first event for this term from the New Media Research Cluster here at the AA. Basically, the cluster, just to give you a little bit of a window of what the purpose is between myself, Joel Newman, and Vasily Strumpakos, we set up this research cluster under Brett Steele's cluster initiative to sort of look at parallel practices and how we can sort of explore new forms of communication. And we're really happy to kick off the first of the events today with Zach Lieberman. And we're also joined actually today by our second event, which will actually be Mr. Ed Burton, who's sitting over here of Soda Play, where basically what we're going to be doing is kicking off a series of initiatives this term. I don't know how many people are from the AA in relationship to how many are not, but last year we kicked off a series of talks from people like performance artists of Stellark. We had ARS Electronica's Future Lab here discussing a whole series of issues between interactivity and education. We had Dextro as well, and we've tried to create a series of events inside the school to kind of stimulate a kind of culture which is kind of emerging between different forms of new technologies, communication, and the arts. Outside of that, one other thing that we're actually sort of trying to implement is a residency program that we're going to kick off this year, which is going to be an open call for artists to actually apply to be part of the AA community for 2 to 4 weeks, working with the students to be able to sort of start to create a conversation between the parallel disciplines. So with that, I'll let Vasily introduce a little bit about Zach, and then we'll kick off the event.
Although I would like to say a lot of things about Zach, and I think I don't know where to start exactly, but as a personal impression, is like is one of the most important and inspiring figures in the discipline of art / technology / interaction / interface. And Zach's work, I see it like as a new understanding of how interface or interaction works, how we can come to understand again how we interact with the machines, and through this interaction how we interact with other people. So a lot of his works deal with this kind of communication between people, and how we could go to another level but for this of talking or communicating through words, but through sounds and through gestures, and to build a new kind of approach to this kind of area. He has been exhibited and in many places around the world, and he has been awarded for a lot of his projects, including the latest is a distinction he got from the ARS Electronica prize for his project Drone. And including in his repertoire of very, very interesting and very innovative kinds of work include, for me, like ingenious types of work like message devote and remark and hidden words, and manual input sessions that he will perform today. So I would like not to speak anymore about this, but in fact, I'm more anxious than you, I think, to see all these things. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Zach.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. I'm from America, and it's really a pleasure to be here, and I just want to say cheers. I guess cheers is the right word. I want to say cheers to Vasily and the New Media Research Cluster and the Architecture Association for having me. So if I could ask to reveal the projection. Okay, so beautiful. I'm going to start, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to myself. So this is what I look like in 1997. So the title for this talk, or what you could call this talk, is How I Came to Lose All of My Hair. So this is what I look like. I was a student at this time, and I was studying fine arts. So I was studying painting and printmaking. And it was actually an accident in a way that I wound up in the field that I'm in. What happened was something that happens to a lot of students, which is that I had to find a job. So I was graduating from school, and at that time it was very popular to be doing web design. And so I applied to do a job in web design, and they told me to bring a portfolio. And I actually brought slides of my paintings, and they were expecting to see a design portfolio. But they saw something, and they took me. And I learned on the job I had to keep books in my backpack, so I had a book about Photoshop and a book about Illustrator in my backpack. And I would come in the morning and not know anything, and at lunchtime I would hide and look in the book. And in the afternoon I was very productive. So what happened was it was 1999, and the economy was like this. And then all of a sudden, the economy was like this in terms of web design. So we had no work. So I really had a lot of free time. And at that, no, really. And at that time, there was a whole community forming that was using Flash and using ActionScript, and it was really centered around Joshua Davis, and he had a website which was called Dreamless. And Dreamless was a discussion forum, and I really fell in love with this whole field and the genre of new media, and especially thinking about the realm of animation and writing software to animate. So I travel a lot, and one of the things that happens when you travel is they ask you what your occupation is. And it always feels very strange to say that I'm an artist. And so what I want to say is that I'm a researcher, that I'm doing research. And so I'm going to talk to you today about the kind of research that I do. As Vasily mentioned, it's really focused on this field of exploring the nature of communication. And what I do, or the kind of work that I make, are performances, installations, investigations into the nature and the way that we communicate. And they oftentimes have to do with the body or augmentation of the body. And the main goal is to be playful, organic, and a bit absurd. So I write software. This is what it looks like, what I do on a daily basis. And it's very textual. This is what it looks like. This is how I make my work. It's very logical, and in a lot of ways it's very boring. But I like to think about software and technology the same way you might think about breathing. You're not conscious of the fact that you're breathing. So in my work, it's not important, or it shouldn't be important that it's software. I don't want it to be conscious. So think about it this way. So I will start by showing you the first project that I made when I was a student. I went back to graduate school because I decided that there was no work, and I wanted to explore this field. And gesture machines was a project that was really the first test, in a way, that I had to make in order to discern whether or not this would be a field that I could work in. And I had always been really interested, or really excited about the act of drawing. So my background in fine arts, I was obsessive about drawing. And so I wanted to write software that could explore what drawing could look like in software. So this project is called Gesture Machines, and it's based on the idea that if you draw something, that there's information in that drawing. So in this case, when you draw something, there's a curve in the drawing, and I wanted to see what would happen if the line uncurled itself. So I started with a very simple question, which is, what would it look like if a line uncurled itself? And then I had to write software in order to see the answer. And I had always been interested in this field of animation and this idea of things coming to life. And so for me, this was really a way to bring lines to life, to think about how software could bring lines to life. This one is called Follow the Leader. So really thinking well, how could one drawing turn into another? This one is called Head Over Heels. Everything you draw is upside down and backwards. And so I'm going to write my name. It's very hard. You really feel drunk. But one of the things that was interesting, or that was playing with this, is that your interaction is also the content. And so if you're dragging this thing around, you're also drawing as you're playing. And so this was kind of a nice idea that so if you interact in a certain way, you're actually generating content. And I thought this was interesting. Another one, pouring buckets. This one was thinking about drawing as a kind of sculptural form. So if you made a drawing, what would happen if things moved on it? And it's fun. You can kind of trap them. If you build the right structure, you can trap these dots. Well, there. So you can trap them, and then if you feel benevolent, you can let them go. So, and so it was this experiment that I had to make, and when I made it, that's when I really made the decision that this was a field that I could work in and that I could explore and see interesting ideas or potential. So one of the things that happened when I was in graduate school is that one of my teachers, professors there, Golan Levin, invited me to come and work with him. And so in 2002, we left New York and we went to Austria, to ARS Electronica, and we worked on 2 projects that summer, and the projects were called Remark and Hidden Worlds. And the projects came about because Golan and I realized that we had a common interest, and we had a common interest in this question of the voice in terms of what might it look like if you could see your voice. So we were interested or inspired by the work of the Czechoslovakian animator Pavlitova. And Pavlitova has this animation, which is called Rechi, 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 which means words, words, words. And in this animation, you can actually see the words come out of a character's mouth. And you can see the words travel in space and into the ears of people that are sitting next to them. And so for us, we were really inspired about this idea of thinking of a language, a visual language, to imagine what the voice might look like. And we were also inspired by this piece to explore, in a way, a kind of cartoon language, what the cartoon language might look like, or what cartoons may have to tell us about seeing the voice. So the first project, which is called Hidden Worlds, participants wear goggles. And these goggles have been modified. These are 3D goggles. So I don't know if you've ever used a 3D goggle, but it's in a way like looking at a card in front of your face, a 3-dimensional image. But we've modified them. So we've cut a hole in the goggles so that you can see through them. So we've made the mirrors that are inside of the goggles transparent, with the idea that you can see a 3D image, but you could also see people that are sitting across from you at the table. And the myth that we presented in this piece was that your voice would be this kind of noodle form that would come out of your mouth. So as you say something, you see a kind of noodle emerge, and based on the properties of your voice, you can control the noodle. And that you would be sitting around this table, and in a way it's a kind of collective hallucination, where 6 participants can see what it would look like if we could actually see our voice. So I show you. Forgive me for pausing. It's very hard to videotape this three-dimensional image, but we videotape from inside of the goggles, so you can see that it's this transparent image, so you can see people sitting across from you. And you can also see on the table the shadow that these noodles would be creating if they were actually in the space. It's totally frightening if somebody is sitting across from you and they scream and you see this, their words actually come towards you. It's very, it's super aggressive. The second project that we made that summer was called Remark. And Remark was inspired by the work of the Gestalt psychologist Wolfgang Kohler. And Wolfgang Kohler would do these experiments in the 20s and 30s where he would show people these shapes. And he would say, one of these shapes is named Taquita, the other shape is named Malumba, which one is which? And of course, there's this relationship, right? Taquita sounds very sharp and angular, and Malumba sounds very curvaceous. So Kohler was really exploring this idea of the relationship between shape and sound. And Golan and I wanted to create a project which would take this as the inspiration, but in a way work backwards, where we would take sound and actually generate shape. So in order to use this exhibit, there are two podiums, and you stand at a podium, there's a microphone, and in order to use the exhibit, you cast a shadow. And the myth that we present here is that the things that you see on the screen are the shadows of the sounds that you're making. So they seem to kind of emerge from your head. And the idea that we wanted to create was one where there would be a direct relationship between shape and sound. And so if you make the same sound, you would see the same shape. We also presented in the system phonemes, so we could recognize short parts of words. And because this was the myth of that these are the shadows of the sounds, you could interact with them using the shadow of your body. Because they respond to the shadow of your body, you could actually trap them. Golan and I worked on this project in 2002, and we installed them. They were installed at ARS Electronica in the Museum of the Future. And we felt that the projects were very successful, and one metric or way that we were evaluating them was that we had this room. We had, behind these two exhibits, we had this kind of small booth where Golan and I could sit and write code or, I don't know, adjust things. And you would be in the booth and you'd be listening to people use the exhibits, and you would have no idea if it was a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old. You would have no idea if they were German or Austrian or Japanese or British. You really didn't know. And we thought that was a really nice metric for success in the exhibits, but we were wondering what the next step would be. And for us, the next step was really to envision this idea of a performance. So we created a project which is called Messa de Voce. And we were interested in this idea. If you took those exhibits and thought about them as the kind of amateur version of the software, we thought, well, what would a professional version of the software be? And in order to explore that, we decided we needed to find professionals. So we created this idea, or thought of this idea of a performance which would feature 2 performers. And these are actually the first drawings that we made, and we took these drawings and we ran around to try to find grants and support. And we contacted 2 vocalists to work with us. We worked with a Dutch sound poet named Jaap Blanc and a New York-based composer and singer named Joan LaBarbera, and we invited them. These were 2 professionals, so people, they must have been in their mid-50s, and they had been working for more than 20 years each in performance and singing and composing, so they had a vested interest in exploring the voice. And both Joan and Jaap had visual metaphors to describe what they do. So Jaap was really interested or excited about this idea of scoring and notation, and he did a lot of work visually with notation. And Joan had a visual concept called sound painting, and this idea of layering sound in the same way that a painter might layer pigment. And so they were both interested in exploring these visual ideas with Golan and I. The performance is 45 minutes long, and it focuses on different aspects of the voice. So it focuses on unvoiced sound, and it focuses on vowels and on consonants, and then moving into ideas of like language and communication and into also music. Actually, I want to pause it here. I want you to pay attention. I've done this once before, but it's really a pleasure. My parents are sitting here in the front row. And this was a performance that we made in the ICA in London in 2003. And my parents were in the audience, and they laugh louder than anybody. So I want you to pay attention to the first laugh that you hear, because it's one reason why it's great to have your parents come to everything. And I'm so glad that they're here now. Do you hear that? That's them. Okay. So we were interested in this idea. If you have a performer in a concert also featuring a projection, how do you not lose the performer? And our solution was to think about the projection as a cartoon frame that the performers live in. Another idea we wanted to explore was thinking about the projection as a kind of costume. In this scene, Joan and Yap are singing into a kind of fluid world, and they can control the color based on the vowel that they sing, and control the flow based on their body. So in this scene, they can paint using the pitch of their voice. And that's to clear the painting. In terms of hair loss, I think I lost a lot of hair working on Messa de Voce. And it's actually one anecdote I want to share, which was really exciting, is when we were performing at the ICA, there was one night when my parents actually, in order to do the sound check, they wore the costumes and performed, and Golan and I wanted to go on tour with my parents. An interesting thing, we also made an installation version of this. So one of the things that happened, because we were traveling with the concert, is that other people wanted to try it. And so we made a version for participants to try it themselves, and where participants can become performers. An interesting thing happened after I worked on Messa di Voce, which was that I was invited via the ARS Electronica Future Lab. I know that Christopher came and spoke to you earlier this year, to work on a project, and the project was called Motionscapes. And it was a project that was funded by Nesta, which is a British organization that funds science, technology, and art projects. And the project was looking at how software might be used in classrooms for disabled children. So in the UK, they are more inclusive. They'll have physically disabled and mentally disabled students together more often than in the United States. And they have these schools, and the schools are called PMLD, Profound Multiple Learning Disabilities. So these are children that are operating at 1/3 to 1/5 their age. And the trend since the 70s has been to do multisensory education. And the question that we were asking is how software might be used. As a very simple tool, taking some of the core technology of Messa di Voce and thinking about how it could be used for disabled children to teach very basic ideas that you and I might take for granted, like cause and effect, that I do something and something happens, or just as a means for improvisation or play or self-realization. So the project was, well, we did this experiment. We've installed it in 3 schools. There are 40 of these schools in the UK, and so the software is up and running in 3 of them. And it was really looking at taking motion as an input and amplifying motion. And this idea of using motion came about because the caregivers would be in the room, and they could be standing behind a child but not moving. So if the child is moving, we would take that and amplify it. So I can show you, these are some short videos that we took when we were testing. But a lot of the same ideas or same technology from Messa di Voce, but now for a completely different audience. So taking motion, in this case using the motion of the child to paint. So the caregiver could be standing and not moving and then not be part of the scene. This scene, the next scene, is a kind of rhythm. So it takes motion and creates a kind of rhythm. And we found this was very popular with the children, that they could see their motions and then get into some kind of feedback loop because the system is creating a rhythm. So for example, this child wasn't communicating verbally, but he was really communicating with us through the software and performing. So we were all on the sides, and he was looking at our responses and really using his body in an interesting way. So he was communicating with us through the software, and the teacher said that they really never seen that level of concentration. This child is a very limited range of motion. So he's just using small motion in his arms or in his legs to control a scene. But he really had full control. So we would take the motion and amplify it. So he didn't have to move that much. But he had control over everything. So he was really, he was also really deep into the software. I like to show this project because for me it was really eye-opening, and it suggests alternative audiences to create work for. So that was also, I mentioned Future Lab, and I don't want to forget it was also with Land Design and Production Science, which are two companies which are based here in the UK. So I worked together, and we had this consortium, and we were funded by Nesta. The next project I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to do something very strange. Well, I wanted to present this project to you first, so I wanted to start and do a short performance for you. And I had this really bizarre series of events happen with my computer. I can't explain it. I have no idea how to explain it. But I'm going to go give my talk, and then we're all going to pray. And I'm going to restart my computer, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to all pray for my computer. Well, anyway, hopefully I'll be able to perform the manual input sessions for you tonight. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. This project happened because Golan and I had been touring. And we had been touring with Messa de Voce, this performance with the two singers. And it was really fun, but it was also a tremendous amount of work. And the performance took so long to set up. And we wanted to create a performance that would be really light and that we could set up quite easily and travel very easily. And we were interested, we took as a starting point this idea of hand shadows. And we were inspired by this idea of thinking about the shadow, or the shadow that a hand would create as a starting point for a work. And we were inspired by other artists. For example, Laurie Anderson has a really wonderful video in which she's singing, but she's also drawing with her hand as a shadow at the same time. So we really like this idea. Also, there's an artist named Sue Costable, and Sue Costable does live performances, and you can see her hands. She's oftentimes playing with material. And it was really seeing Sue's work that we thought, okay, we could do a performance where you actually see the hand. So the way the performance works is we take live images from an overhead projector, like this one which is here in front of you. So this analog light source, we take it, and there are shadows which are created with it. And then we also take images from a video projector, from a data projector, and we combine them to create this kind of mythic world, the world where the shadows actually create shapes and the shapes create sound. So it's an audio-visual performance that we make using an overhead projector. And it's totally fun for us to perform. So well, I hope I can set it up and show it to you. So we'll all pray for the manual input sessions. And so this was this performance that we made with overhead projectors and live imagery. So one question that happens, or people ask, which is, how do you guys support what you do, or how do you make a living? And so I like to show this project because this is an example of how we make a living, and it's actually a project that we made together with the ARS Electronica Future Lab, and it was funded or supported by a company called SAP. And SAP is a database company. They're based in Germany. And they were the original supporters for the project, which was called Hidden Worlds. And they fell in love with the noodles. And so we were doing work with these noodles. And so for about a year, Golan and I were traveling and doing lots of projects with noodles. So I'll show you some of the projects that we did. But for example, we made these bar tables. So this was they had a big party. This was in Berlin, and we made these interactive tables. And the tables, I'll show you the video. So. But this is an example of a kind of commercial project. So there are tables. The tables have projection from the inside, and they're responding. In this case, they respond to fingertips. So the noodles love fingertips. They also love objects, so if you put down a cell phone well, they like circles. So if you put a cup down or a coaster. So they're just kind of living in the table, these noodles. And we actually, not in this version, but in a later version, we networked the tables. So you could actually take the noodles and drag them from one table to another, and you could throw a noodle or fling it, and it would arrive at the other table. So this was a project that we made. It was for a build. They had the opening of their headquarters in Berlin. So it was very funny. It was this kind of German business people, but they developed all these interesting games, and it became this kind of social, this way to meet. So here, everybody's waiting. One guy's got all the noodles, and well, these were behaviors that I could not have predicted. And then the second part of the project was this building in Berlin. At night, when everybody left the office building, there were these displays, and the displays would show these noodles. And the noodles, the building would become a kind of gigantic aquarium. The noodles would swim around. And it was really fun to work on this project because, well, this is really in the center of Berlin. And I had to work late at night. And the later it got, the more drunk people were on the street. So at 1 o'clock, people would come and they'd be kind of staring at these noodles. And then at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, people would just be perplexed. And at 4 o'clock, they didn't know what was going on. And the other aspect of this building is there's a kind of sensor in front, and it can record your pulse. So you can make the whole building pulse with your body pulse, which is kind of frightening. No, it's pretty dramatic. And so there are, in this installation, there are 22 network displays. So there are actually projection. This building is glass, and there were projection on the ceiling, on every floor, and projection in the lobby. And it was crazy to work on this project because I was very deep in the building, and then I would have to run downstairs and run over here, and the security guard would let me out, and I would run across the street to see what I was doing, and I made a mistake and have to run back up. And you can see that we had a logo, and whenever you see a logo in an artwork, then you know that somebody paid a lot of money for it. So this was an example of a kind of project. So these noodles exist, and you can actually, there are microphones at the street level, and you can create noodles as well. And so I could actually see when the tram would come, I could see on my diagnostic screen these huge noodles based on the tram. And actually, I'm back again. Last weekend, I'm doing another project for SAP, so I never leave the noodles. Do noodles for the rest of my life. Another project that I made was for ARS Electronica. In 2004, the theme of ARS Electronica was time shift. They had a festival. It was their 25th anniversary, and the festival was about, the theme of the festival was called Time Shift. And I created a project. The project was inspired by a total accident. I was playing with Google Images, and if you type in the term family, I really love Google image search, and you type in a number, like a year, it's really fascinating. You wind up with, they look like family photographs from 1970. Some of them are not really, but for the most part, it's pretty cool. So I discovered this, and I started to play with it. For example, if you type in family in 1910, these photographs, they look like they're from 1910. So I was obsessed with this, and I wrote some code to download as many images as I could. So here's an example of images for 1909. So they're really quite beautiful. And then what I did is I took these images. I was interested in a way of using these images as a source and to find a way to move through them cinematically, or to think about them as an input for some kind of cinema. So I took all of these images and I ran them through a face detection algorithm to try to find all of the faces in the images. I love this. Look, it finds that the face up here. Doesn't find these faces, but finds that one. So, and sometimes it finds non-faces, right? That looks like a face. That really looks like a face. So it's cool. Like I ran it through. I had to hand edit these images, and then I ran them through the face detection algorithm. And the idea was to create a way to move through the images cinematically. And at ARS Electronica in the Museum of the Future, there's an elevator. And it's a very special or cool elevator because it has a projection on the floor from below. when they built the elevator, they built a large glass floor, and there's actually a projection from below, so you can stand on a projected image. And the idea of this piece was that as you move from the ground floor to the top floor, you could move from 1900 to 2004. So at the basement level, you would see photographs from 1900, and that you could move almost as a kind of cinema through time, so from 1900 to 2004. So I have a kind of render of what it looks like to move back and forth through the images. So here's what it looks, so this is a kind of mock-up, but so coming down from the top floor, you zoom into faces. Sometimes not faces. But the idea was to have enough time with an image so that you could develop a relationship with the face. And then this is, for example, what it looked like when the elevator goes up from the ground floor to the top floor. And the idea was that, this piece created there's a database of images and a database of faces. And so it's always generating this movie on the fly so that you would never really see the same face or the same image twice. You would have to ride the elevator a lot. And it was very beautiful to work on this because you start to see that even though the technology has changed, so the camera technology has changed a lot. It's from 1900, where everybody's very stiff and not moving and outside, to 1930, where people start to have cameras indoors, or where you can see actually when people start to have their own cameras that the images are crooked, or when you start to see color introduced. It's interesting because the motivation is the same, or this seems like there's really something very continuous, and even though the technology changes, there's something very continuous about the human desire to be recorded or be recognized, or for a moment of time to be recorded. So that was picturing family. The next project I would like to talk about is a project which is called Drawn. And Drawn was really inspired by my work that I did before, where I was studying, when I was an artist working with paint. And I loved the print shop because I ruined all of my clothes. And I wanted to make a project where I would ruin my clothes again. So I envisioned this idea of a performance where you could be painting, and then you could see what you're painting. Well, you paint down here, so I would be on stage with a screen painting, and then you would see it up here. And the idea is to create this kind of myth that the painting would come to life, that I could paint something and then I could touch it and it would exist or come to life. The work was inspired by this early Thomas Edison film. So Thomas Edison filmed this artist named John Stuart Blackton. And in this film, they used stop-motion animation techniques to create the illusion of a drawing leaving the page. And I really like this idea. I love this idea of, yeah. Well, I thought it was very cool, this idea of a drawing coming to life. It was also inspired by the work of the Portuguese artist Helena Almeida. Okay, I have to check that I said it right. And she would do these great projects where she would take black and white photographs and then she would augment them with blue paint. So in this case, she creates the myth that she paints a blue dot, that she picks it up, that she eats it, and she cries blue tears. So I really like this idea that she creates of ink or paint that you can touch, that you can physically touch. So I created this performance. The performance is called Drawn, and I was performing together with a Japanese musician named Pardon Kimura. So what I'm doing down here, you see it here, but it's not entirely true. So it's this kind of video image that you see, which is both real pixels and fake pixels. So it was this kind of magic show. Well, it really felt like a magic show to perform. So I show you, I have a better video. I'll show you from my DVD here.
続いてご紹介するのはザッカリーさんの作品ドローン。ザッカリーさん、白い紙に何やら書いていますが、あらら、動き始めましたよ。作品ドローンは紙に描いた模様がまるで命を吹き込まれたかのように突然動き出す、まさに手品のような作品です。種明かしをすると、紙に描いた模様は実は瞬時にパソコンに取り込まれ CG 映像に変換される仕組みなんです。そしてその CG 映像を手に合わせて動かしているんです。現実と CG を組み合わせることで生まれる摩訶不思議な世界。この後、テレビの前の皆さんをさらなる不思議体験へとご案内します。
So, well, Drone was really fun. We were performing it, and we were on tour in Japan. And a funny thing happened, which was after every performance, people would come up and they want to see how it worked, or they want to play with it or try it. And so I was inspired to create a version for people to try themselves. So created this installation version where you have a table and you can paint live at a table, and then there's a rear projection screen so that when you're working with it, you can see what you're doing here, but also it becomes a way of performing, so people that are in the exhibit can also see what you're doing live. So here's a person who has less hair than me. And so you can paint something, and then you can touch it or play with it. And it was very interesting to see all the, and then we take all the drawings and we put it on the wall behind the exhibit. But it was really fun to see people play with it, the kinds of things that they come up with, and this really creative way of telling stories, and telling story with ink, that in a way that the ink comes to life. And in a way a lot better than my performance. It was really a joy to see all the things that people come up with. And one of the interesting things is that I started to notice when people use the project, you can really see that their mouths open the moment that they touch the ink. So I became very interested in this idea of the mouth opening phenomenon. So I want to show you this photograph. This is I was in a festival for children in Amsterdam called Syndicate. And so here's number 1. So number 2, she looks at the hand entering the scene. Number 3. And number 4. So I think one of the biggest joys of creating this project is really to see this, that when people see something come to life, or they see some kind of magic, that response, or opening the mouth. Because I really feel, as a performer and as a person who's creating projects, that if you can open somebody's mouth, then it's a very good path to their heart. So I want to show another project, and the reason I show this is because, well, it has a relationship to London, and the project is called Rota Sketch. If you Google, I like to show this, if you Google software for the choreographic process, you get 0 results, right? In a way, it's not entirely true, but I like to show this to make the point that people aren't really thinking about choreography in software. I'm sure there are some projects, and it's not entirely accurate. But in general, you think about software, you think about something like Photoshop, which is software for images, or Word, which is software for writing. And we were interested in this idea of what would software for choreographers look like. what would somebody who's working with dance or working with choreography want from a piece of software? So I was working together with Scott De La Junta, who's a researcher in the field of dance and technology, and Susan Rethorst, who's a choreographer. And so we took a look at how Susan worked, and we discovered that she really worked on paper, and that she made drawings, and that the act of drawing was an important part of her dance making. So, oh, yikes. I hit the end button. Sorry, I'm not used to it. PowerPoint, or the keyboard position on my laptop. Okay. Wow. Slideshow from current slide. Okay. So we discovered that she was really invested in this idea of drawing, and so we created, well, okay, there are some other approaches. So, for example, there's an approach when you think about motion. There's an approach which is very common that people are interested in, which is this idea of motion capture. So we were thinking about this idea of how do you translate motion into a visual form. And so one approach is to actually capture a dancer's body. So to use these kind of markers, and you can record, and you use this kind of fancy computer and camera system. And we created something which was very simple. We're very small in a way, which was called Rota Sketch. And the idea of Rota Sketch is that you could take a video, you could take as input a kind of video, and then you could draw on top of it. And so this idea would be that you could record yourself dancing and then draw on top of it or notate it in order to see or mark the nature of your motion. So I like to show this, this chart. So let me see. I'll make this a chart. Felt tip pen. Okay. So I like to show this chart when you compare motion capture and Roto Sketch. Motion capture, I think about this as kind of computer-centered or user-centered. Motion capture is really centered around analysis, so it's based on what the computer is thinking. And Roto Sketch is really based on what the user is thinking or how the user is drawing or moving. And motion capture sessions, if you get a session to use this cameras or this expensive rig, it can be quite expensive. And Roto Sketch is free. So we made this software and then we released it for choreographers to try. So I'll show you Roto Sketch if I can. So the idea of Roto Sketch is that you could load in a movie. So it's a very kind of simple software. You could load in a QuickTime file, and then you could change the speed of the movie. So you could make the movie play slow or fast or so on. You could also scrub through the movie if you wanted to. And then you can draw on top of the movie. And the idea is that the drawings that you make are made in time with the movie. So that as you play the movie back, the drawings are made not only in X and Y, but also in T, in time. So now you have another axis to draw on. And so the idea was that dancers could use this, or choreographers could use this. They could record themselves dancing, and then they could actually make a drawing as a way of abstracting, or as a way of getting some distance on what they're doing. So I'll show you an example. We worked with a dance company in, there's a dance company in London which is called the Siobhan Davies Dance Company. And they have a project in the summertime which is called the Bank Street Project. And during the Bank Street Project, they invite choreographers to come and work with them. So this summer, we worked there and we set up Rota Sketch, and we worked with these choreographers. So here is, for example, is a choreographer, and she has a dance, and the dance is really about sketching in space. So she has a dance which is really about using her body to draw in space, and she used Rota Sketch. So this is the kind of drawing that she made. So she could, in a way, notate the kind of ideas that she was having or the kind of visual forms that she was creating with her body. And then she could make it transparent, so she could just focus on the drawing, for example. And there are some controls. You can make the line stay on, so it can become kind of accretive, so you can see over time. So this was really interesting to see, in a way, how this software could be used for the creative process. And I think that's in the same way that Motionscapes is software for a new audience. For me, this project was also something for a new audience. So we did this. This was in the Shaban Davies dance studio. Everybody was working, and we had this kind of corner where we set up. And it was very fun to see the kinds of things and the kind of creative uses that come out of software. In a lot of ways, the dancers, they weren't entirely sure what we were doing there, but then the moment that they started to draw, they started to come up with all kinds of creative uses for the software, and it was really a joy to see. Finally, the last thing I want to show you is probably the best image of all of the works that I showed you tonight. Oh, no. Sorry. I want to mention one project. So I get asked sometimes, what are you working on now? And one of the things that we're working on now is a library of code. So you get asked sometimes, do you release your software? Do you release your code? And so I've been working together with some colleagues to create a library of code that can help people create work like the work that I make. So we have this project which is called Open Frameworks. We have a website where you can, it's called openframeworks.cc, and you can go there and sign up on our mailing list. And this is absolutely, we're immediately about to release this. So if you've worked, for example, in working with software creatively, you may know a project like processing. So this is in a way a processing, but designed for C++. So this is this library that I'm working on right now. Openframeworks.cc. And then this is the image that I want to show you. This image, this is my favorite image of all of the images of all of the projects. The reason that I love this image is because you can see very clearly on this children the sense of wonder. And I really think that the most important thing in terms of making work and making projects is to be able to create this sense of wonder. And for me, that's a joy to be able to do in my work. So finally, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me. I want to, again, say thank you to Vasily and the New Media Research Cluster. Yeah, no, my father is pointing something out. And I want to put up the information where you can learn some more about my work. So these are the URLs and my email address. And to say thank you for having me. What I'd like to do is the following. So I'll leave this up for a second. And then I want everybody, I'm happy to answer some questions now. And I'm going to restart my computer. And then maybe, hopefully, if we pray hard enough, then I can perform the manual input sessions for you. So thank you very much. So what I'd like to do now is the following. Maybe we can turn the lights on, turn the projector, cover the projector, and if there are questions, I can answer questions while I scramble with the computer. So are there any questions that people have? Okay, there are no questions, so then I'll just ask you to pray, and let's see what happens, and okay, all right.
Is there a special prayer?
A special prayer? I don't know. Okay. So it's going to be 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to restart the computer and see what happens, and then I will try to perform for you the manual input sessions. I would also like to take the moment to plug, I know it was already mentioned, but I want to plug Ed Burton's talk, which is coming on the 14th of February, which would be awesome, and I would love to be in London to see that. So 14th of February, Ed. I want to say one other thing. I'm going to tell you something personal about myself, which is that tomorrow I turn 30. So this was, yeah. So this is my final moment as a 20-year-old. So I'm really honored that I could share it with you. Are you sure? There's no questions? Really? I was planning on there being questions. Yeah.
What would you like for your birthday?
No. What? Oh. New laptop. That's, yes, exactly. Okay, computer's up.